Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I am Sir Worldwide, and I have a very special guest here for this segment. This is Mr. Carl Wilson. And he's going to tell you something about international ness that you need to hear, okay? Because all we do on Sir Worldwide talk about international-ness. Carl, give it to him, man.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Carl Wilson, as you've already been informed. What I'm here to do is give you a little insight on my experience in Saudi Arabia and a couple other areas of the world. Louder? Okay. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Carl Wilson. I'm here to give you a little insight on my experiences of about 3.5, 4 years, and primarily in Saudi Arabia, but also other parts of the world. About 2006, our mother, my sister and I's mother, was diagnosed with lung cancer. And my sister, who was born and raised in the United States, has been working abroad overseas for at least the last 20 years as an administrator. And she had always tried to get Mom and I to come over and visit her, but due to, for lack of a better term, brainwashing and propaganda, we were always too afraid to venture out. Unfortunately, it took my mom's health condition to bring that about, and that my sister and I decided that we would, my mom and I would come, and so we could all be together. And we subsequently had a good 11 months of all of us being together before Mom passed away. So that's what took me to Saudi Arabia in the first place. Matter of fact, because of that, I had been in Saudi Arabia for about 3 or 4 months before the job opportunity presented itself. Because at that time, prior to leaving Los Angeles, I had a collections business and I had a couple of employees, and I was actually doing that prior to leaving for Saudi. So actually the first couple of months when I was in Saudi, I was still maintaining that business, because due to the time difference, I was able to, in essence, work a swing shift. In other words, work from midnight till 8 in the morning Saudi time would be the flip time on this side. Speaking of that, that was an interesting dynamic, getting used to talking about jet lag. When we initially went to Saudi, our mom and I, we got there in May of 2013, or maybe January at any rate. It took about 2 to 3 weeks to get acclimated to the jet lag, the time zone. It was as someone gave us a sleeping pill, and all we could do for 3 weeks was wake up, eat, take a shower, and go back to bed. It was like that was a little more, but after a while we got acclimated to their time zone. Subsequently, in the years following, because as I indicated, I worked there for about 3.5, 4 years, the first 2 weeks of coming back into that time zone when I was teaching, which I'll get to that in a moment, at 12 noon, it was as if someone hit me over the head with a sandbag, 12 noon Saudi time, for the first 2 weeks, because I hadn't adjusted for the jet lag. And I would just, if I sat down for more than 5 minutes, I would fall asleep in the class. So after noon, I would make it a point to always stand up, because in Saudi Arabia, they have air conditioning everywhere, so every place is cool. So, as I indicated, for the first 3 months, I probably was doing the business, dealing with Mom and everything, and getting used to the culture over there, which initially was a bit of an adjustment, because as you know or may not know, things are separate over there in regards to men and women, and in regards to the public access. So for example, men and women in general don't congregate together in public, with the exception of if it's your family member or if it has to do with work or school. So for example, Starbucks, which they have all of the retail outlets that we have here and then some. And for those who are wondering, the only place I didn't see that, and I'm jumping around, but the only place I didn't see was Jack in the Box. And subsequently, mentioning that in the fast food, you know, they have halal. So the meat that they serve, the meat they use in the McDonald's in Saudi Arabia is different than the meat that they use here. Okay, and then I'm segueing, I'm jumping around, but I'm trying to give you a good picture. So for example, they do not allow any poultry or meat from the United States into Saudi Arabia. That's something that I found, well, that's one of many things that I found very alarming, if nothing to say the least, and it's due to it's halal in their country, which is equivalent to, I guess you'd say, kosher, and so they don't want the preservatives, the steroids, and everything like that. But in spite of that, they still have all the fast food places. So for example, they have Church's Chicken, okay, but it's a Muslim country, so they don't call it Church's, they call it Texas Chicken, okay, but it's the same corporation, the same colors, but it says Texas, and so in spite of all of that, they still have a propensity for the fast food. But the culture, back to getting adjusted. So in saying all of that, when you go to these places, they have two sections everywhere you go. It's the family section. The family includes women, children, single or married, and men if it's a family member. So if you go into Starbucks and you're with your sister or anyone who you're related to, or your wife or something, then you can go into the family side with them. If not, you're single and you're going into the single side, which I think they should just label it men. So that's true pretty much everywhere you go, with the exception of, no, everywhere. Even restaurants, even 5-star restaurants down to Sizzler type restaurants, it's always separated. And I found that to be kind of interesting. The exception would be the mall area. Okay, and this is another thing that I found interesting because, as I indicated, there is no intermingling between men and women in general. Okay, so after being there a couple of months, an opportunity came up. I'm jumping around, but you'll get the picture. After being there a couple of months, I had an opportunity through my brother-in-law, a headhunter, had contacted him, and he referred me. And then, though I hadn't taught at that point, they saw my CV and they wanted to meet me, and I started there. We walking around, they hired me on the spot, and it was only supposed to be for 3.5 weeks, and that turned into 4 years. Okay.
What were you teaching?
I was teaching ESL, English as a second language, and I was teaching it to primarily young men 18 to 35, primarily 18 to 22. And it was in various situations. So
you did not teach women?
No, those are separate. Once again, everything in Saudi Arabia is separate from everything. It's separate. So even, for example, if you were to go to a buddy's house, or you met someone and he invites you over his house, the likelihood you probably never meet his wife and kids unless he wanted you to, because the way things are structured is in the house they have a sitting room, kind of like they have it, in America and different places, and that's where you do the entertaining, or the man cave, and the rest of the house is separated from the women and the children. They're very adamant about that. That's considered very serious about the family structure.
So you couldn't go out to a social setting and meet a young lady that's of Saudi background?
No, not in a social setting per se. Once again, due to the culture and the way it's designed. Now, however, once again, in the work environment, and you're bound to interact. Well, you're not bound to, but you may. Everything's really is very separated. So, for example, now I must bring to people's attention that Saudi Arabia is one of the more conservative Saudi countries, or Islamic countries, in the world. So the flip side of Saudi would be Bahrain, which is like in Dubai, which is like Las Vegas on steroids. So for example, you can drink in Saudi. And I mean, not Saudi, I apologize. You can't drink in Saudi. There are no bars, no nightclubs, but you can drink in Dubai and you can drink in Bahrain. However, there are no liquor stores. So you can't go into a store and buy liquor per se, but you can go in, if you go to a hotel or into a nightclub, you can buy liquor. Now, there's people that have liquor, but it's not going to be sold on the street, and it's not to be consumed on the street.
So the nightclub is full of foreigners then, right? Not Saudi people?
You mean in Bahrain and Dubai?
In Saudi Arabia,
well, there are no nightclubs in Saudi Arabia, none. What you have is social clubs, like you have hookah lounges, but once again, it'll be all men. So I had an experience where I met a gentleman who wanted me to tutor his son, and he actually owned a sheep ranch, goats, because they have Ramadan, and they have certain times of year where the goat. So you can buy a goat and triple and quadruple your investment in a couple of months. So that's what's done amongst the ones who, just like they would do here. And so we went out on the range and the whole 9 yards, out in the desert at night. It was beautiful, stars. You can see you know, other than being in Saudi, you'd have thought you was in the middle of the desert out here in the United States. You know, but the point being is he owns. It was like it reminded me of a miniature golf type of thing. It's kind of designed like that, but it was a spread, and it had cabanas, and they had TVs and everything, and the fellas went there. Like when I saw it, I was like, wow, this would make a nice club, because it would. It was nice and everything, but once again, the men and the women don't socialize like that, and then women don't, in Saudi Arabia, women don't tend to go out. There's no social place where women go to hang out other than the mall, the hairdresser, but there's no club for women to go in Saudi Arabia. They go to each other's houses. It's more family orientated. You see, Saudi's very conservative. Okay, however, once again, when you go to Bahrain, so for example, Bahrain would be, as I think I mentioned before, would be the same distance between Long Beach and Catalina Island, a little further out. Well, it's a little further out, but Bahrain, everything goes. And so 1 million Saudis travel into Bahrain every month. Yeah.
Wow.
For that reason. Okay. Their culture, they pray 5 times a day, which tends to really settle you. It gives you perspective, gives you an opportunity to reflect on what's really going on and what's really serious in the world. I found it interesting. Some of my colleagues from the West found it ridiculous that a place would stop making money to pray. They found that to be really absurd. They thought it was backwards. I thought that was backwards that they thought that. So, because what I mean by that is you would be, when the prayer comes, there's an adhan. Okay, and in Saudi, it's like they have masjids, like we have liquor stores in black neighborhoods. There's a masjid. You can't go a half a mile without running into a masjid in Saudi Arabia. So when there's an adhan to come to prayer, there's no excuse. Unless you don't know that, but there's nobody forcing you to go pray if you don't want to. Okay, so if you're in a mall, for example, all the stores in the mall will shut down. Once the adhan comes, it lets you know you've got 10 minutes to shut down. And they'll shut down, but they don't kick you off the mall, they don't kick you off the grocery store. You can still shop in the grocery store. You just won't be able to check out. Okay, so, or if you're in a restaurant and you're eating, they're not gonna make you stop eating. You can keep eating, but you just have to wait. But if you haven't gotten your food, you're not gonna get it until after prayer.
Question, Carl. What did you like about Saudi Arabia the most? What excited you? Because you couldn't socialize with females there unless they were foreigners, correct?
Okay. Well, there's a place called the what do you call it? The embassy, where all the embassies are, or some of the embassies. It's it's a compound. It's more than it's like a campus, the diplomatic center. So within the walls of that, it's like the West. And so there were parties once you were vetted that you was okay. Then you would slowly, but this is what I found out over. Because once again, when I originally went to Saudi, I wasn't in the mix. I didn't go there for that. I was just dealing with my mom, my family. So I was kind of, other than going out with them, I wasn't in the mix. So once I started working, that put me in the mix because I started meeting other people and interacting with the other people. So as far as the dealing with the females, once you got into that mix, it was like being on campus, because it was like there was a shortage of straight men. That's another thing I found very interesting, which you would think wouldn't be that way. It was a refuge for a lot. In other words, let me put this politically correct. We had guys working in the school that they wouldn't allow to work in the United States, based on their flamboyancy and their propensity to fraternize with the students on a social level. So I remember when I first got there, I was oblivious to this. This is one of the things about, there was, and they said they went camping one weekend. And I was like, I want to go, but I didn't know what that meant at the time. So out of 20 of one year we had a staff of 20, 7 of them were overtly homosexual. Like one guy, we call him Tyra Banks. His name was Mahmoud. He was Somalian. He was a cool dude, but the point being, they wouldn't have allowed him to work in the United States on an all-boys school with that type of, you know, but they allowed that there. Okay, and because of that, because of the separation of the sexes, it's easier to conduct yourself in that way and not be so noticeable, which I found really interesting, because you wouldn't think that. And I'm not saying it's any more prevalent there than here. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying me as an American going to a country in the Middle East having these, you know, it's like when people come to Hollywood, they have these ideas, you know.
Got a question for you, Carl. I have friends in Ho Chi Minh City, friends in Tokyo, friends in Bangkok that teach English. You were teaching English, correct?
For ESL, English.
So how are you compensated? How was the pay? And, you know.
The pay?
Yeah, I mean, what did they do for you? Did you have to pay rent?
Well, it's part of my parole condition. You know, I'm a convicted felon. I'm just playing.
Okay.
Just joking. That's not true. The pay is structured, put it like this. You don't pay any taxes. You don't pay any rent. Typically, because you're going there under a contract. Now, initially, I didn't go under a contract. So when they hired me on the spot, they were desperate. You know what I'm saying? So on one hand, I guess you could say I was kind of working under the table, and that was an interesting dynamic too, because there was times where they could have came in the campus and raided the place, looking for people who didn't have documentation to work.
Right.
I heard that that's what happened.
Did you have to pay rent?
No, because that's part of the contract.
Oh, you didn't pay no rent?
Well, first I was at my sister's place, but then once when I came back, after it was established that I was going to be working there, because they provide living quarters. And they pay for, well, see, the interesting thing is because I was independent, I didn't have a contract with them per se. So I got things that they didn't have to give me under contract. So like one year I went to Quito, Ecuador, because after the second month, they asked me to stay. They said, how long can you stay, da-da-da, because I'm brilliant in any way. So.
Well, you mentioned that you had gotten married while you were there?
Yeah, but let me tell you about Quito, Ecuador. We got a couple more minutes, right? Okay. Because that's what secured my position for the next 3 years there. Because after the first year, you had to have a credential, and so I wasn't aware of how large the ESL industry is. They teach it all over the world.
Yes.
But kind of going to the point, because my mind jumps around, as you were asking about the money. So, for example, the exchange rate in Saudi Arabia is in favor of the dollar. So it takes 3.75 reals to make $1 American dollar. Oh. Okay, so if you go to McDonald's, or I'm just using that as an example, you might order something that's 10 reals, a Big Mac meal. That's $3. It's cheaper than it is here. Okay, and the culture as a whole is cheaper as it is here in regards to eating things. However, if you go to a Western establishment, you're going to pay, maybe like a restaurant, you're going to pay comparable price. It's going to be a little cheaper, not that much cheaper, as opposed to if you were eating more ethnic food, because of the fact that Saudi Arabia is similar to the United States, and it's one of the richer countries in that region. So you have a large expatriate population that's employed there, and they're from different countries. So, for example, the population when I was there was 27 million, and a quarter, 7 million of those people were from other countries like me. So the pay is really interesting because pretty much, so for example, any restaurant you go to, it's going to be a male Filipino is going to be your waiter. So whether you go to McDonald's or a 5-star restaurant, it's always going to be a Filipino male serving you, okay? Your driver in the cabs is more likely going to be Pakistani or from India. And it's interesting, same thing when you go into the 7-Eleven there, which is like it is here. Or used to be. I found that funny. I'm sorry, I couldn't help that. But but interesting thing too is though, even within the same profession, within reason, like I made a little bit more money than my colleague from South Africa because I'm from the United States. And he actually had more, that's his profession. He's been teaching 10 years. I just started, which is one of the things my district guy asked me not to tell people. Because just like in any work environment, you have people stabbing you in the back and this, that, and the other. But I love the teaching experience and dealing with this, because at that point, that's what really immersed me in the culture. Because I went from just being in my mom, with my family, to getting to know the people from the city and stuff. And the same elements that exist here exist there.
Carl, tell us about this marriage, man. You got married in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia?
Look, man, I asked you not to bring that up. I'm still, yeah, okay, no. Interesting thing, yeah, because I've been married the first time for 15 years. I have 2 lovely daughters, Ayana and Jamila, college grads, 24, 21. Beat your kids. And as a result, I was divorced. I actually converted to Islam about 10 years ago, and my sister's been Muslim for years. That's what helped me understand. And so one of the pillars is to be married, okay, because you want to do things that are correct. Okay, so this is what led me to that. And you know, my sister introduced me to one of her maid's friends, and we hit it off. And this sister was from, still is from Mombasa, Kenya, which that's what took me to Mombasa. So, but after a couple of months, we got married because we're both Muslim, this, that, and the other. Plus, we wanted to have sex. And that wasn't the only reason, but I did want to get married again. And then this is the interesting dynamic to that. I learned so much because when she was, about how ignorant I am to the world, because when she mentioned, I had never heard of Mombasa, Kenya. And I was like, Mombasa, Kenya, being a typical arrogant American, where is that? I ain't never heard of that. And she's like, oh, you know, she's got this beautiful African type of dialect. And right. She's like, it's just one of the most vacation destinations in the world. Yeah. And it turned out to be. Because I'm the ignorant one that didn't know that it was on the southeast coast of Kenya. I know now, and that the ocean shelf goes out a half a mile, and it's crystal clear water with sea turtles and palm trees and white sand beaches and all that beautiful stuff, which I wasn't aware of until I met her. And then the economy there, her and I were talking about opening a business there, and this is an interesting dynamic that I experienced, because in us discussing it, one of the questions that I almost subconsciously asked, but I asked it out loud, is, I was like, wow, honey, you think any black people are going to patronize our business? And to that, she busted out laughing, because I asked that question because I'm from the United States. And you know our economic condition here in the United States is not good. Okay, so even when we have business from our own people, we don't patronize our own business. But here I am on the continent of Africa with this African woman, you know, everybody there black. I mean, you know, so the notion to her that black people wouldn't buy something from you is ridiculous. You see the example I'm making? And I found that was really, these are things that struck me in my journey, because I have a mindset that's a certain way. So basically, there's a whole industry of agriculture, because they don't sell their land, but you can work it. So once again, colonialism, like the movie The Black Panther, you know, it's 89 shillings to $1 in Mombasa, because that's where the Eastern Europeans go to vacation. So you see these George, what's his name? Remember the guy with the cigar? George, he's a comedian back in the old days. Had a cigar, he lived to be 101 years old. George Burns. So you see a bunch of George Burns walking around with dime pieces. Beautiful sisters. And when I first walked into the dang grocery store, I wasn't ready for that. You know, because I'm like, damn, because I'm slow to catch on what's going on. I was new there, I'm still sorting it. And then the sisters are looking like, yeah, you know, like they looking at me because, you know, I ain't tripping. But that was one of the nuances I noticed about the place. So then when you go to the clubs, it's that same, not to get too far off, but colonialistic exploitation. Because they got the European, the Eastern Arab disrespecting the women, but the women are allowing themselves to be subjected. Like this guy next to me did something very vulgar to this sister, and she looked like she was used to it. But then he comes to me like he's a little teenager. I'm not gonna tell you he was disgusting, and wants me to, I thought it was funny. And then the look I gave him let him know that I didn't think it was funny. But anyway, back to my wife. So we were married. I'm not married anymore due to a set of circumstances, but we're negotiating. Because one of the interesting aspects, brother, that I also became aware of is we have this notion, because when you go overseas, they say, or you go to the Philippines or different countries, Vietnam, Thailand, be careful because the woman will just want to marry you for your your citizenship. Right. And we're brainwashed into, and there's some truth to that. You know, there's some truth to that, but so what? Because people want to marry people for some reason, as long as you have understanding, you see what I'm saying? But to us directly, we've been brainwashed. So what I'm saying is I married her. I found myself wanting to marry her because when we got married, I filed for residency in Kenya. Right, and then even in doing that, that empowered me. You know, it gave me something that we don't have here, because we don't have a home. We have a home, but we don't know it. So just like in every other aspect of your life, people treat you based on the options you have. When you don't have no options, they treat you like shit. When they know you have options, then they treat, whether it's on the job, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's your friendship, wherever it is, When they know you have options, then they treat you better. So that was something that really struck home to me. Just like when I went to Mecca, okay, because I did Umrah 3 times. I went to the Kaaba, you know, and it's amazing. Someone pointed out to me, my brother-in-law, which I wasn't aware of, there's a million pigeons that fly over that place. They sit up there on the perches and everything. There's not one drop of bird poop. Not one drop of bird poop, never. So what is that? What do pigeons know that? You know, I'm just saying. I mean, when I say millions, they're like flying over there, you think it was the Vatican or something. And there's not one, okay. So I go to Mecca and I had that experience. I meet the brothers, and I mean brothers, I don't mean just black people. I mean people from all races, all cultures, all places that's Islamic, okay? And we're talking, it's like, where are you from, this, that, and other, and I'm from the United States, and they're like, no, brother, you're not from the United States, blah, blah, blah. And they're, based on my facial features, they're breaking down my lineage, or some semblance of it. Because, you know, and which was blowing my mind, because I don't even know that. You see what I'm saying? Going back to the rhetoric that we've heard, we've lost, we've been stolen, we've been taken from our country, and now all this is resonating because I'm face to face with it. And it once again, it made me. It was like somebody asking you who your mother and father is, and you don't know. You know what I'm saying? It's really a sobering experience, which gave me a better understanding of our plight here on the plantation known as the United States of America. Right. So on the other side, there's still the Western influence in Saudi. You know, they're still very heavily influenced by Western things, that and the other, but there's a divide, you know, because you have the Bedouins, which are the old school people, and then the new school.
So, you are here in the western part of the United States right now. Do you plan on staying here, or are you going to go back to an international lifestyle?
I'm going to do as you, my brother. I'm going to escape the plantation when opportunity presents itself.
That's right.
I have 2
I'm out of here.
I have 2 daughters, and I didn't think it was fair that I escaped and leave them here.
Right.
So as a result, and I'm reestablishing my relationship with them as adults, which is very, very fulfilling for all of us. So no, I'm not staying here. I'm just formulating another way to get up out of here, because I recognize once again, the United States has a great infrastructure. Yes. We got the best education and upper education, not lower. We got the best upper education, the best medical. Ironically, most American citizens don't have access to it. Okay, in my limited travels, which you've traveled much more extensively than I have, but I've come to understand why people from other countries come here and see what is here, which is the opportunity.
Well, let me correct you just for a second. We have great universities here.
Yeah.
But we're not #1 in education. No, we're down in the 40s right now. Number one in education is South Korea. We're down in the 40s. We were #1 for a long time. But that's just one thing. Don't get me started. This is your interview. I just want to let you know. That we ain't.
No, that's what I said. I said higher education.
Yeah.
I mean, when I said higher education, I meant universities.
Yes, I'm talking about the universities.
I understand. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. So I understand why people come here and they say, well, I can work 2 jobs and go to school, because they can't do that where they come from.
Right.
So with that being said, though, I like to use an analogy in regards to Americans of African descent. In regards to our place here in this country, though we've contributed traffic lights, air conditionings, elevators, peanuts, George Washington, a bunch of stuff. You know, even the latest movie, Hidden Numbers, they show you how the sisters helped them figure out how to get to space if they ever went. And there's a million stories like that. But, you know, it's like when you buy a pet, and that pet, you grow to love the pet, it becomes part of your family.